A real friend. For the purposes of sports day at our primary school, the village was divided into two factions, the north and the south. We scrappy northerners occasionally won our sporting events by using sheer grit and determination and by cheating when we could get away with it. The blue ribbon identifying those from the north and the red of the south were largely superfluous. You could easily tell the northerners we were forced to wear our ragged PE school uniforms and holy plimsolls, insubstantial canvas shoes. But the southerners, they wore brand new white shorts, brand new red t-shirts, real athletic shoes, some even wore spikes. Despite all our cheating, we never really stood a chance. And you know, we made our friendships too, as if an invisible line had been drawn down the middle of the village. The kids who lived in the predominantly government-owned council houses in the north rarely made friends with the middle-class kids who lived in detached houses and bungalows that their parents actually owned, and where in the back gardens they grew flowers instead of potatoes. But one year, when I was 10 years old in my final year of primary school, the impossible occurred. And Diane Giannopoulos, who heralded from the south, looked upon me with something resembling kindness. And she invited me to her house one day after school for tea. Now, Diane was a small, brown, solemn, dark-skinned girl. Her silky hair was cut all one length, and it was pulled to the side and tied in a partial ponytail by a large brown satin bow. Though unremarkable in many ways, an air of hopeless sophistication surrounded Diane on account of the fact that her parents were divorced, which would have been a scandal had it not been for the fact that her father, a mysterious, wealthy foreigner, had left them well provided for. Diane and her mother still lived in the large detached house that had a telephone and an automatic washing machine, forms of technology that would take years to arrive on Charnwood Avenue where I lived. Well, the invitation was greeted at my house by total disbelief. And on the morning of the tea party necessitated a great deal of scrubbing that left me glowing an unhealthy salmon pink. The night before, my mother laid out a freshly laundered white shirt, usually one did for the entire week, and she ironed my navy blue pleated skirt. It was a hand-me-down, worn shiny by years of use. And I have to say, the event exceeded all my expectations. When we arrived, Mrs. Giannopoulos had just got out of the bathtub. At 4 o'clock on a Wednesday afternoon. In my house, all 6 of us, one at a time, shared the same bathwater once a week on Saturday nights. So in the unlikely event that we woke up in the morning and decided to go to church, we wouldn't be found wanting. And not only that, but Mrs. Giannopoulos wore a bright red dressing gown that barely reached to her knees and failed to disguise the fact that she was completely naked underneath. My mother wore a thick flannel affair that managed to disguise the fact that she was human. Let alone there was a naked body beneath it. Well, Mrs. Giannopoulos looked at me from head to toe, taking into account the frayed cuffs of my now ink-stained shirt and shiny skirt. She emitted a sigh of exasperation. And then with a dismissive wave of her cigarette, she bade us go and wash our hands while she went into the kitchen to make the tea. The bathroom was a revelation. Pearly white tiled walls, thick plush bathroom mats that swallowed my feet as hungrily as sinking sand, a low pink toilet on which my granddad might be able to lower himself, but he would never get back up again. There was a pink wash basin and pink bathtub, and I compared that little toilet with the monstrous lav at our house, with the metal tank on the wall above and the long chain and wooden handle for flushing. Technology we considered revolutionary compared to the outhouses that we'd been used to. But not only that, there was no evidence to suggest that anyone had just taken a bath, which meant that they had 2 bathrooms. I could hardly take in the magnitude of this alien reality. But I washed my hands and followed Diane down to what she called the dining room. We sat down and Mrs. Giannopoulos arrived with a large tray. She hadn't even bothered to get dressed to make the tea. I was dizzy with delight. And then I stared open-mouthed at the food she had prepared. Tinned spaghetti on toast, and as many Kit Kat bars as we wanted for dessert. Store-bought luxuries that we Blount kids coveted with almost a biblical passion. I resisted a momentary impulse to grab a handful and stuff them into my school satchel, but I remembered my manners. Thank you, Mrs. Giannopoulos. My words did the breaststroke in the pond that had gathered in my mouth. Another dismissive wave of the cigarette, and she disappeared into the hallway, and we heard her murmuring and laughing into the telephone. I waited and watched Diane. She picked up her knife and fork, and she cut off a tiny piece of toast and popped it disinterestedly in her mouth. I tried to follow her suit, but I was already a lost cause. One delicious whiff of the tomato sauce pushed all notion of polite restraint aside. I picked up my knife and fork, bent my head to the task, and shoveled in great mouthfuls of tea and toast and spaghetti. At last I sat back and sighed in satisfaction. Diane was staring at me in a sort of horrified fascination. As if she couldn't imagine that I could eat another mouthful, she said, "We'll have dessert later." And for a moment I was bereft. "We're going outside to play," she informed her mother. Well, the back garden consisted of a lawn. It was as smooth as green velvet, surrounded by a border of flowers. It was dominated by a tall tree that sheltered a little playhouse and a neat little shed. "Let's climb the tree," I yelled. Diane said, "I'm not allowed to climb trees," as if that settled the matter. "We'll play dress up." And I could tell by the way she said it, I had very little choice in the matter. My heart fairly plummeted when I saw the array of fairy princess dresses on the little hooks inside the playhouse. In no time at all, Diane had transformed herself into a yellow fairy, and then with a firm efficiency that fairly took my breath away, she took a pink confection, put it over my head, and before I knew what had happened, I was a fairy. A wand completed my humiliation. Well, I watched Diane as she pretended to prepare the tea. She poured it into tiny little cups on the table, and I lowered my oversized self into the undersized chair. And then I tried to enjoy myself, as Diane obviously was. But after supping numerous cups of air, even she began to get bored. And I said, let's play something else. Do you have any stilts? No. Well, how about snobs or marbles? No. Well, what about conkers? What? Oh, never mind. I thought about that smooth green lawn. Oh, if I'd brought my knife, we could have played stretch. She didn't miss a beat. I'm sure my daddy's got one in the shed. He left all his tools behind. She ran off and she came back flushed with success. She handed me a large, impressive pocket knife. The blade was a little stiff, but I managed to open it up. I abandoned my wand, and then, still dressed as fairies, we skipped outside to the lawn. I showed Diane how to hold the knife and throw it in such a way that it stuck into the lawn. She tried it a few times, seeming to enjoy the weight of the knife in her hand and the sound that it made as it sunk into the soil. And really, for her first timer, she was doing very, very well. And I said, "Brilliant, Diane," and she beamed. Well, then I explained the rules. You had to stand facing one another, and then taking turns, you had to throw the knife a few inches to the right or left of one another's foot. You then had to move the knife and move your foot to that place. You see, eventually you get so far apart, one of you would fall over, you would lose. If you threw the knife too far, you lost a turn. If you threw it too close, you might lose a toe. But that had never happened. Well, we started to play, and Diane was thoroughly engrossed in the game. She gripped that knife as if her life depended on it. She began to laugh out loud, something I never heard her do before. "This is fun," she cried. I was beginning to wobble, and that made her laugh more. And then she threw the knife with deadly accuracy to within an inch of my right toe. "Watch it," I cried, "not too close," but I couldn't help laughing either. I moved the knife, moved my foot. Now I was really wobbling, and then, quick as a whippet, she shot across and pushed me over. As I went down, I took hold of that brown satin bow and gave it a tug as I went down. Her hair falling all over her face, she fell on top of me. And then we rolled across the lawn, away from the knife, a barrel of human tulle and navy blue serge, across the flowering border and into the dirt beyond. Heedless of our fairy outfits or our school uniforms beneath, we began lobbing great handfuls of dirt at one another. Diane was laughing so loud she began to hiccup, which made us laugh even more. At last, we managed to stop laughing, and then we started to think about something else we could play, when all of a sudden we heard a horrified shriek. "Diana! Alexandra! Ariana Giannopoulos, what on earth are you doing?" Diane shot up like a singed cat. And then Mrs. Giannopoulos saw the knife still stuck into the lawn into a corpse. Horrified, she gripped the red dressing gown at her neck as if I were about to plunge it into her chest. She looked at me through steely little eyes and said, "It's time you went home. Diana, come into the house. Now." With a toss of her beautiful head, she marched into the house, a blister of red rage. We stood up and helped one another get out of the fairy princess outfits and brush the dirt from our outfits, our school uniforms. "I'm sorry, Diane," I said. "I think it might be best if you slipped out the side gate. It might be safer that way." I agreed this was a good idea. She said, "Go to the front door and I'll meet you there and bring your school satchel." As a precautionary measure, as I went the other side of the hedge, I bent low so that Mrs. Giannopoulos wouldn't see me. I went and waited at the front door a long time. Eventually, Diane arrived. I noticed that the brown satin bow was back in her hair. She handed me the school satchel and I turned to leave, but she reached out and she touched my arm. "I had a really good time," she said. And then as an afterthought, she added, "Perhaps next time I could come to your house to play." "That's a good idea," I said. But we both knew it would never happen. "See ya," I said. "See ya," she said. And then I took my satchel, put it on my shoulder, and began to walk home. The satchel seemed heavier than I remembered, but I put a little more distance between me and Mrs. Giannopoulos before I fumbled with the buckles to investigate. When I opened it up, Diane had stuffed my school satchel to the brim with Kit Kat bars. Now that's what I call a real friend, I thought to myself as I tore ravenously into the first bar. And then, munching happily, I turned my face toward the north, which was, after all, where I belonged.
Ah.